He was just mopping the floor outside the restrooms when she heard him switch from French to Arabic to Mandarin flawlessly, like it was nothing. Marissa Langley stopped mid-step, heart-thudding, because janitors weren't supposed to sound like United Nations interpreters. What she didn't know was that this quiet man had been holding the soul of the hotel together for years, silently, brilliantly, and completely unnoticed. It was just past 3:45 p.m. when Marissa Langley stepped into the Crestline Summit Hotel in Sacramento. She didn't announce herself, didn't bring an assistant, and didn't carry luggage. All she had was a leather-bound folder tucked under her arm and a quiet suspicion she couldn't shake. After 32 years in the hospitality industry, Marissa didn't put much faith in polished quarterly reports, especially ones that looked too clean. The guest satisfaction scores coming from this property were suspiciously high, particularly for mid-season, and she'd seen enough to know that a hotel's numbers never told the whole story. The real truth was always somewhere between the lobby and the break room. She walked through the revolving doors with her usual calm, wearing navy flats and a slate gray blazer, her graying hair swept into a tight twist at the nape of her neck. She didn't make eye contact with the concierge. She didn't need to. If the staff didn't recognize her yet, she preferred it that way. Marissa made a habit of slipping into her properties unnoticed. That's when you saw what was real before the smiles were staged and the radio started buzzing about corporate on-site. She passed the front desk where Tina Morales, the hotel's young front desk manager, was halfway through explaining late checkout policies to a guest. Tina gave her a polite half smile, not recognizing her boss, which Marissa accepted with a nod. That's when it happened. As she walked down the narrow side hallway toward the staff restrooms, an area most guests never wandered into, she heard something that made her stop cold. It was a voice. No three voices, or at least three languages. Someone was speaking fluent French with a calm, pleasant cadence. Then mid-sentence, the same voice slipped into Arabic, not hesitantly, but confidently, with the rhythm of someone who lived in the language. Seconds later, Mandarin, crisp, tonal, precise, and then silence. Marissa turned her head toward the source, a janitor's closet. The door was slightly ajar. She peeked in. There he was, a man maybe mid-40s, dark-skinned, wearing a faded navy uniform with a name badge clipped just below his collar. He stood with one hand resting on a mop handle, the other pointing to a paper map of the hotel. In front of him stood two elderly Chinese guests, one clutching a travel brochure. The man explained something softly in Mandarin, nodded politely, and smiled. Behind them, a man in a white thobe and kufi hat waited, holding a phone with a reservation pulled up. The janitor turned and addressed him in Arabic, fluid, confident, completely at ease. There was no showmanship in his delivery, no rush in his voice, just clarity, calmness, and kindness. He ended each conversation with a gentle bow, then quietly wheeled his mop bucket down the hallway, like it was just another Tuesday. Marissa stood frozen. She didn't move until he disappeared around the corner. Then she pivoted. Back at the front desk, she leaned over the counter. "Tina," she said in a low voice. The manager straightened slightly, eyes narrowing with vague recognition. "Yes, ma'am, I'm going to need access to yesterday's and today's lobby security footage. And I'd like to know who your night janitor is, the one who works the second shift." Tina blinked. "That'd be Jamal. Jamal Hinton. He usually starts around 3. Never late?" Marissa nodded. "Has he ever worked in guest services?" Tina gave a half laugh. "Jamal, no, ma'am. He's just custodial staff. Quiet guy. Keeps to himself mostly. Speaks a bunch of languages, though. I think he watches a lot of documentaries or something." Marissa didn't reply. She made her way to the back office where she pulled up the lobby security footage. At 4:32 p.m., she found what she was looking for. The camera angle was grainy but clear enough. There was Jamal crouched down, pointing to the map for the Chinese couple, then standing upright, pivoting to help the Arabic-speaking guest. No supervisor in sight, no clipboard, no clipboard, no clipboard, just natural hospitality. She leaned back in the chair and crossed her arms. Something about the way Jamal moved reminded her of her first hotel job back in Akron when she was 21, fresh out of community college and struggling to prove herself in a sea of crisp suits and raised eyebrows. There had been a janitor there too, Mr. Watkins. He barely spoke, but he always knew when a guest needed help before they even asked. "Do we have his file?" she asked Tina, who had wandered into the office. "I can pull it from HR." 10 minutes later, Marissa flipped open a manila folder labeled Hinton Jamal A. The resume was short. High school diploma from a Sacramento public school. No college. A few scattered jobs, bus station, night clerk, dishwasher, mailroom assistant. Nothing flashy, no warnings, no write-ups. Just one commendation from 3 years ago, signed by a shift manager who had since transferred. It referenced Jamal helping an elderly guest find her missing granddaughter during a convention weekend. Has anyone ever sat down with him for a review, a real one? Marissa asked. Tina shrugged. I don't think so. He's on nights. Housekeeping usually just checks off the basics. Mops floors, restocks carts, takes out the trash. Honestly, he flies under the radar. Marissa stared at the file a moment longer. Later that evening, she wandered the back corridors of the hotel, the ones guests never saw. She found a few housekeepers folding linens in the laundry room. One of them, a stocky woman named Myra, with a streak of silver in her braid, looked up and said, "You looking for Jamal?" Marissa didn't answer, just waited. "He's a quiet one," Myra said, "but sharp, real sharp. Helped a Japanese couple last year who got their dates mixed up and missed their flight. Spoke to them in Japanese like he lived there. Why is he still a janitor?" "Because nobody asked who he could be," Myra said simply. That night, Marissa didn't sleep much. She booked a room on the 11th floor under a different name and sat by the window sipping hotel tea that tasted vaguely of plastic and thinking about all the resumes that never made it past the first round. Jamal Hinton wasn't just good with languages, he was good with people, and hospitality was first and foremost a people business. At 7:00 a.m. the next morning, she was waiting by the staff entrance with 2 cups of coffee. When Jamal walked in his uniform, pressed shoes worn but clean, she stepped forward. "Mr. Hinton," she said. He paused, cautious. "Yes, ma'am, got a moment." He nodded. They sat in the break room. She handed him the coffee. "You probably don't know who I am," she said. "You're Ms. Langley," he replied quietly. "Regional director." She raised an eyebrow. "You knew I saw your picture once. At a staff meeting slide deck. I figured you had your reasons for not saying anything." She smiled. "I did. I wanted to see things the way they are, not the way they're staged to be." Jamal sipped the coffee. "Fair enough. Tell me something," she asked. "How many languages do you speak?" "6," he said. "French, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, a bit of Swahili and Japanese. All self-taught." "Yes, ma'am. I like learning. Makes the world feel closer." She paused. "Jamal, would you consider stepping into a different kind of role here? One where your voice isn't in the background, but part of the experience?" He looked confused. "I don't have a degree. I never worked front desk." "I'm not looking for a degree," she said. "I'm looking for someone who already understands what this job should be." He didn't answer at first, just stared at the floor like he was trying to figure out whether or not this was a test. Finally, he looked up. "If I can help more people, I'd be honored." And just like that, Marissa knew the numbers in the quarterly report weren't wrong. They just hadn't told the whole story. Jamal Hinton had been holding up the spirit of the hotel with a mop in one hand and 6 languages in his head. All it took was someone finally stopping to listen. Jamal didn't sleep much the night after that conversation. Not because he was anxious, at least not in the way most people understood anxiety, but because something in his chest felt unsettled, like the steady rhythm of his world had shifted by just one beat. For years, he had operated in the quiet shadows of the Crestline Summit Hotel, emptying trash cans, polishing elevator rails until they gleamed like chrome, and speaking softly in half a dozen languages to guests who barely remembered his name, but always remembered how they felt after talking to him. That was enough, or at least it used to be. But now, sitting alone in the break room, long after Marissa Langley had offered him a role that didn't even exist yet, Jamal found himself staring at the cracked ceramic mug in his hands, like it held the answer to a question he didn't know he'd been asking. The next morning came quickly. Marissa was already in the office by 7:30, speaking with the HR coordinator about drafting a job description for the new role, guest harmony advisor, though she insisted the title was secondary. "The job isn't about hierarchy," she said. "It's about being human in the places we've stopped expecting humanity." At 10 minutes past 8, Jamal knocked lightly on the doorframe. He wore his usual uniform-worn work shoes, a tucked-in navy shirt, and a cautious expression that looked like it had taken years to perfect. "Morning," he said softly. "I wasn't sure if I was supposed to start something today." Marissa smiled. You already did. She invited him to sit. For the first time, Jamal noticed how large the desk looked between them, how polished everything was compared to the back corridors he usually walked. I spoke with Tina this morning, Marissa continued. And HR, we're drafting a new position, but until the paperwork catches up, I want you to shadow guest services. Front desk, concierge, lobby walkthroughs. You're not here to fix plumbing anymore, Jamal. You're here to notice what others don't. He nodded slowly, not fully convinced yet, but open. That was enough. By lunchtime, word had spread. Staff whispered about the janitor who got promoted, but none of them really understood what had happened. They watched him from the corner of their eyes as he followed Tina through her morning briefing, listened during a guest complaint call, and stood silently near the check-in counter, translating directions to a confused couple from Morocco without blinking. He didn't carry a clipboard. He didn't bark orders. He just made people feel seen. Within days, the ripple effects began. A bellhop named Marcus, who had once scoffed at Jamal's quiet demeanor, started using a translation app to learn basic Japanese greetings. One of the housekeepers, Rosa, wrote down 10 Swahili phrases and taped them above the break room sink. Staff who had barely nodded at each other before began swapping stories about guests who arrived, scared, confused, or overwhelmed, and how Jamal had calmed them in seconds. It wasn't corporate training. It was example, lived out in real time, but not everyone was on board. On the third day of Jamal's new shadowing schedule, the hotel's assistant manager, Keith Drummond, pulled Marissa aside. He was in his mid-40s, sharp suit clipboard, tucked under his arm like a shield. Marissa, he said carefully, I just want to make sure we're thinking about optics here. She raised an eyebrow. Optics, I mean promoting a janitor. No hospitality degree, no formal guest services background. It's unconventional. What precedent are we setting? Marissa didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We're setting a precedent for paying attention, Keith. If that makes people nervous, maybe they're in the wrong industry. Keith didn't respond, just nodded and backed out of the room. The next day, a guest named Mrs. Elham Nasser wrote a glowing email to corporate. She'd flown in from Dubai and spoken almost no English. She arrived disoriented, exhausted, and tearful. According to her message, a kind man in a blue shirt welcomed me in Arabic, told me I was safe, and walked me to my room. I do not know his name, but I will never forget his heart. Marissa printed it out and taped it to the wall in the back office. Jamal hadn't even mentioned it. That's when the shift became undeniable. Jamal didn't wear a different uniform, but the staff started treating him differently. Not because he demanded respect, but because they couldn't ignore the gravity of someone who moved through their building like a living compass. One afternoon, a mother from South Korea lost track of her son near the elevator. She was frantic, language barrier thick between her and the concierge. Jamal appeared without being called, spoke to her in Korean, calmly reassured her, and had the boy located within minutes. The mother cried. The staff watched in awe. That evening, Marcus the bellhop walked over to Jamal and said, Man, I've worked here 5 years and never seen someone flip a switch in the room like that. Whatever this new job is, you're already doing it better than half of us. Jamal didn't say much, just smiled and nodded. But Marissa noticed he stood a little straighter that day. And the next morning when she arrived early to check on him, she found a small dry erase board set up beside the concierge desk. On it, written in 5 languages, was a single phrase, welcome. You are safe here. Beneath it, a question, who will you make feel seen today? Staff began writing answers. Some funny, some sincere, some personal. And it caught on. By week's end, even the most skeptical members of the team were stopping by to check the daily message. Tina told Marissa, it's like he rewired the energy in this whole place without trying. Guests mentioned him in reviews even when they didn't know his name. The gentleman in the navy shirt who spoke to my grandmother in French made our trip, wrote one. He found my lost phone and even made me laugh, said another. When Keith Drummond read those reviews, he didn't say another word about optics. One day after a particularly long shift, Jamal sat down with Marissa in the break room again. She poured them both coffee. How's it feeling, she asked. He paused, searching for words. It's strange, he said. I used to think being invisible was part of the job. Stay quiet, clean up, and go home. But now, it's like people are looking and actually seeing. Marissa nodded slowly. They should have been all along. He looked down at his coffee. I didn't expect any of this. Neither did I, she replied. But here we are. changing the culture one hallway at a time. And just like that, the second chapter of Jamal's journey had quietly taken root, not with press releases or title changes, but with the simple, powerful shift of being recognized and the bravery to step forward when called. The janitor who once slipped silently between shifts had become the voice of something new, something the industry didn't yet have a name for, but desperately needed. And for the first time in a long time, the hotel didn't just feel cleaner, it felt human. By the end of his second week as guest harmony advisor, Jamal Hinton was still adjusting to the strange new rhythm of visibility. He no longer entered through the service hallway with his head down and a mop bucket at his side. Instead, he stepped through the front lobby, where the floors he once polished now reflected back the image of a man guests paused to greet. His uniform hadn't changed much, but something in his posture had. He walked a little taller, not out of ego, but out of responsibility. He knew now that people were watching, not to critique, but to learn. It was a Wednesday morning when the email came in subject line Crestline Pilot Program Proposal. Marissa Langley read it twice before forwarding it to Jamal with a short message. "Come by my office at noon. We need to talk." When he arrived, she was already standing by the window holding her reading glasses in one hand, the proposal printout in the other. "Phoenix," she said, turning to face him. "They want you in Phoenix." Jamal blinked. "As in Arizona. As in our sister property in Tempe." The general manager there read the guest reviews, saw the footage, and asked for a training model based on what you're doing here. He shifted, uncertain. "I've never been on a plane." Marissa gave a half smile. "Then I guess it's time." 2 days later, Jamal stepped onto a plane for the first time in his life. He didn't wear a suit, just a clean dress shirt, slacks, and the same polished work shoes he'd worn for years. He carried a single bag packed by hand with 2 changes of clothes and a notepad filled with scribbles he wasn't sure anyone else would understand. In Phoenix, the air hit him like a furnace. The hotel shuttle driver, a young man named Ricky, held up a printed sign that said, "Mr. Hinton." Jamal chuckled. "Just Jamal's fine." When they pulled into the Tempe property, the general manager, an energetic woman named Colleen Sanders, was already waiting. "We're honored to have you," she said, shaking his hand like he was a visiting professor. "Our staff's been buzzing about this for a week. They didn't throw him into a conference room or hand him a PowerPoint deck. Instead, they arranged folding chairs in a large open lounge and gathered 30 staff members, front desk clerks, bellhops, housekeepers, maintenance techs, and food service crew. No titles, no hierarchy, just people." Jamal stood at the front, heart thudding behind his ribs, and said simply, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because someone noticed what I'd been doing for years, and now they want to see if that quiet work can ripple outward." He paused, then asked, "When was the last time you saw someone hurting and chose not to help because it wasn't your job?" The room went still. Then slowly the stories began to surface. One housekeeper admitted walking past a crying child because she didn't know how to comfort him in English. A front desk associate confessed to ignoring an elderly guest with mobility issues because she wasn't trained in first aid. No one was scolded, no one shamed. Jamal just nodded, saying softly, "I've done the same, but we can learn from it." What was meant to be a single afternoon workshop turned into a 3-day transformation. Staff started taping foreign language greetings near their stations. Ricky, the shuttle driver, began learning Turkish because a guest last week had wept from confusion. A concierge created a multilingual printout of local attractions. The hotel began to feel warmer, more intentional. By the time Jamal flew back to Sacramento, he carried more than just a notepad, he carried stories. On his first day back, a new sign appeared beside the concierge desk guest harmony board. Written in 5 languages were the words, "You are safe, you are seen." Underneath, Jamal's daily question read, "Who did you uplift today that no one asked you to guess smiled when they passed it?" Some stopped to take photos. Staff added sticky notes with their answers, small, quiet victories. "Helped a guest in Korean," one said. "Walked a lost child to his mother," said another. Even the skeptical assistant manager, Keith Drummond, left a note, "Listened. Really listened. To a guest I used to rush." By the 3rd week, word had reached Crestline corporate headquarters. Marissa was summoned to a video call with 2 senior executives and the VP of Brand Experience. They wanted to expand the guest harmony advisor role to the top 25 properties. "We'll need formal job descriptions," the VP said. "Metrics, KPIs, onboarding materials." Marissa smiled politely. Or she offered, we asked Jamal what made this work and let him teach us how to listen, first measure second. The VP hesitated, then nodded. Send him to Seattle. Let's build a framework together. Jamal's second flight came a week later. In Seattle, he didn't deliver lectures. He led listening circles. He sat with staff and asked, what do your guests need but never ask for? What language are they speaking verbally or emotionally that we're ignoring? One food service manager moved to tears, admitted she hadn't spoken Spanish with a guest in months, out of fear it would be unprofessional. Jamal shook his head gently. Language isn't a policy, it's a bridge. Back in Sacramento, something else had changed. Jamal now had a desk, a simple walnut surface tucked near the lobby, with a name placard that read, Jamal Hinton, Guest Harmony Advisor. It wasn't behind closed doors, it wasn't fancy, but it was visible, accessible, intentional. Guests stopped by not to complain, but to share. Staff dropped in with questions. He began mentoring new hires. On the back wall behind his desk was a whiteboard where he wrote the daily language word and a question, today's word, Ubuntu Zulu. I am because we are. Today's question, what small thing did you do to make someone feel they belong? One morning, Tina Morales found Marissa outside the break room with tears in her eyes. I just watched a guest thank Jamal in Portuguese, said he reminded her of her brother. The man changed the entire tone of her trip. Marissa nodded. He's not changing the hotel, she said. He's changing the why behind it. By month's end, the guest harmony advisor role was officially greenlit across all Crestline properties. Training was structured not around policies, but people. Emotional intelligence was weighted higher than academic degrees. Hospitality was redefined not as a service, but as a shared human experience. In her final weekly report to corporate, Marissa wrote, this wasn't a promotion, it was a correction. One man reminded us that the loudest voices don't always lead the culture. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, mopping floors, listening closely, translating kindness that rewrite who we are. And in a quiet corner of the Sacramento lobby, Jamal Hinton greeted a new guest in flawless Korean, smiled and asked gently, how can I make your stay feel more like home? Not a script, not a slogan, just a man finally seen helping others feel the same. What can we learn from a man like Jamal Hinton? Too often in life, and especially in the workplace, we overlook the quiet ones. The ones who don't demand recognition, who don't lead meetings or hold fancy titles. The ones who show up every day, do the job and go home. But beneath the surface, many of these individuals carry extraordinary wisdom, compassion, and strength. And sometimes, as we saw in this story, they carry the very heart of an organization. Jamal didn't speak up to be noticed. He spoke up to connect. He didn't help guests for applause, he did it because he believed in the simple dignity of being seen and understood. In a world increasingly obsessed with credentials, data, and surface-level performance, Jamal reminded us of the power of emotional intelligence, lived experience, and genuine care. The lesson is this: never assume someone's value by the title they hold or the uniform they wear. Leadership isn't about hierarchy, it's about heart. True hospitality isn't about perfect service, it's about making someone feel safe, welcomed, and respected in a space that's unfamiliar. And change doesn't always begin with a grand announcement. Sometimes it starts with a mop, a kind word, and someone finally paying attention. If you're someone who's ever felt invisible, maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, or passed over, let Jamal's journey remind you your value is not determined by your job description. What you carry inside, the ability to connect, to listen, to uplift, is a quiet power. And one day the world might catch up and recognize it. And if you're in a position of influence, ask yourself, who have I failed to see clearly? Because chances are there's a Jamal in your building, your team, or your community, someone who's been holding things together in silence, waiting for someone to ask the right question. From all of us at US Instructive Stories, thank you for spending time with this message. We hope it made you reflect, maybe even stirred something inside you. If it reminded you of someone, an unsung hero, a quiet influence, share this story with them. Let them know they matter. And if this story moved you, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing your own experience. Because the more we tell these stories, the more we remind each other, kindness doesn't need a spotlight to be powerful, it just needs to be seen. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.